Good morning, everyone. If you can hear me and see my screen, please put a thumbs up. Okay, great. Welcome. My name is Anna Novogratz, and I am the project lead for the Trauma Recovery Demonstration Grant. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about the Trauma Grant. This presentation will be recorded and shared along with the deck and school guide after this presentation. So before we get started, let's go over some housekeeping items. Please mute yourself and turn off your camera to save bandwidth. Throughout this presentation, please place all questions in the chat box, making sure to send them to host and include your name and email address with your question. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, but I want to ensure all questions are answered. The Trauma Recovery Demonstration Grant School-Based Referral Guide. So the information shared in this presentation can also be found in the Trauma Recovery Demonstration Grant School-Based Referral Guide. This guide will serve as a manual and resource for school systems. It is intended to provide uniform practices to ensure fidelity in the implementation of the trauma grant. All necessary instructions and forms are included in the guide. The guide will be reviewed and updated if policies and procedures change. Any changes to policies and procedures will be shared with school systems via email communication. Our agenda for today, we are going to start off with discussing what is the Trauma Recovery Demonstration Grant. We use the acronym TRDG. What is considered a traumatic event? Which students are eligible, which mental health providers are eligible. We'll talk about preparing for the trauma grant, the student referral process, how you'll let families know about the trauma grant, what kind of data the Louisiana Department of Education, or Ldoe, is collecting, where you can find these resources, and then we'll have time for questions. So what is the Trauma Recovery Demonstration Grant? The Louisiana Department of Education was awarded a $7.5 million 5-year federal grant by the U.S. Department of Education to expand and deliver mental health services to students who are economically disadvantaged, academically struggling, and have experienced trauma. The grant funds will expire September 30th, 2024. Just to note, I will be using the acronym Ldoe when referring to the Louisiana Department of Education for the remainder of the presentation. The purpose of the grant program is to enable preschool, elementary, or secondary students from an economically disadvantaged family who have experienced trauma and subsequently demonstrate academic, behavior, attendance, or other issues at school to access trauma-specific treatment. Trauma-specific mental health services for eligible students will be provided at no cost to the student's family. The goal of the grant program is to increase student well-being, adaptive student behavior, school safety, and academic performance by supporting trauma-specific treatment. The Trauma Recovery Grant is a resource for school systems. Any eligible student enrolled in a Louisiana public charter or private school can request to be serviced under the trauma grant. So, what is considered a traumatic event? Traumatic incidents may be those that occur either within or outside a school environment. Examples of a traumatic event may be bullying, including cyberbullying, harassment, experiencing violence, such as school shootings, abuse in the home, or community violence, physical, emotional, or life-threatening events that have lasting adverse effects on an individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, or emotional health, suicide clusters, death of a close family member, emotional neglect or abuse, family mental illness, homelessness, natural disasters, parent deployed, parent in jail, parents divorced, serious injury to self, sexual abuse, and student in state custody. This list is a representation, but not inclusive of all events that may be considered traumatic. So which students are eligible for grant funds? Eligible students are any preschool, elementary, or secondary student enrolled in a Louisiana public, charter, or private school who meets the following 3 criteria. 1, the student has previously documented or suspected trauma that is adversely affecting the student's academic performance/progress, attendance, and/or behavior. 2, the student is identified as economically disadvantaged. And 3, the student cannot access public or commercial health insurance programs because services through such programs are either unavailable, insufficient, or unaffordable. Economically disadvantaged criteria. So a student is considered economically disadvantaged if that student meets one or more of the following characteristics. The student is eligible for reduced price meals based on the latest available data. Family is eligible for Louisiana's Food Assistance Program for low-income families. The family is eligible for Louisiana's Disaster Food Assistance Program. The family is eligible for Louisiana's program for assistance to needy families with children to assist parents in becoming self-sufficient. Family is eligible for Louisiana's healthcare program for families and individuals with limited financial resources. The student is an English language learner. The student is identified as homeless or migrant pursuant to the McKinney-Vento Homeless Children and Youth Assistance Act and the Migrant Education Program within the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The student is incarcerated within the Office of Juvenile Justice or in an adult facility, or the student has been placed in the custody of the state. Access to health insurance. So the third criteria, student cannot access public or commercial health insurance programs because services through such programs are either unavailable, insufficient, or unaffordable, is extremely important to highlight. Payment eligibility is a key component for a student to become officially enrolled in the grant program. A student must meet one or more of the below characteristics to qualify for payment under the trauma grant. Student is uninsured, is economically disadvantaged, but is ineligible for Medicaid or other federal or state subsidized insurance programs. Student is insured, but trauma-specific services are not covered. Student is insured, but services are unaffordable because of deductible. Student is insured, but services are unaffordable because cost of service exceeds insurance cap. It is important to note a student is not eligible if enrolled with Medicaid or has an application pending with Medicaid. The Ldoe is currently discussing with the U.S. Department of Education about the possibility of adding unaffordable copays to the eligibility criteria. When we get an answer on this, all documents will be updated and school systems will be informed. So which mental health providers are eligible? Providers eligible for reimbursement under the terms of this grant must be a state licensed mental health provider, for example, a licensed professional counselor, and provide secular, neutral, non-ideological services that are non-medical in nature and meet reasonable standards for evidence-based, best practices, promising practices, and/or evidence-informed trauma-specific treatment. If you are a licensed mental health provider and want to participate in the grant program, please send me an email after the presentation and I can help you enroll. Preparing for the Trauma Recovery Demonstration Grant. Schools must form a trauma response team, and schools should distribute the parent and staff letter. It is important to note all parent and student facing documents have been translated into multiple languages to ensure equity of access. Trauma response teams. Each participating school must form a trauma response team, or TRT, to oversee the implementation of the trauma grant at the school level. This team can be the same as a school's school building level committee or well-being leadership team. At least one counselor or social worker must be on the TRT. I just want to emphasize that this does not need to be a new team. Trauma response teams have 5 main responsibilities. 1, print and distribute trauma grant materials such as the staff letter and parent letter. 2, determine a list of 10 students who the team believes has experienced trauma and would benefit from this grant program. 3, submit student referrals to the Ldoe by the second Friday of each month, ensuring each part of the process is complete. 4, ensure parents have the information they need to make informed decisions about participating in the grant program. And 5, scan and email the Ldoe any trauma grant satisfaction surveys that a student or parent brings to school. Now we will walk through the student referral process. Referrals for services can come from many different avenues. There is no wrong door. A parent may request services on behalf of their student. The student may be referred by a staff member at their school. The student may be referred by a member of a school's school building level committee. The student may be referred by a member of a school's well-being leadership team. The student may receive a referral from a member of a school's trauma response team. The student may receive a referral through the Department of Children and Family Services, or a service provider may identify a student who meets eligibility criteria and is in need of services. I am going to walk through the school-based referral pathway over the next few minutes. If your school decides to participate in the trauma grant, a trauma response team will be formed. The trauma response team will come up with 10 students who they believe are eligible and may have trauma. These students can also be identified if their universal screener flags trauma. The trauma response team will then reach out to the student's family to provide them with more information, such as the parent one-pager or parent letter, along with the trauma screening consent forms. All of these resources can be found in the school guide. It is important to note the consent form must be signed before the screener is administered. If the parent does not grant consent, school supports will be offered. If the parent grants consent, a school counselor, social worker, or member of the counselor support team will give the trauma screener. Schools located in Ascension, City of Baker, East Baton Rouge, East Feliciana, Jefferson, City of Monroe, Point Copee, St. Bernard, Tangipahoa, West Baton Rouge, West Feliciana, and Thrive Academy should consider leveraging the graduate intern social worker, when placed, to conduct this trauma screening. I am now going to go into detail about the specific forms you will need to complete during this initial step. Shown here is a screenshot of the consent to participate in trauma screening. Parents must be provided with this consent form prior to administering the screener. The form is an editable PDF, so make sure to include school name prior to printing out the consent form. The red arrows point to where you will add school name. Families are consenting for their child to not only participate in the program screening process, but also to participate in data collection. Data collection is defined as questionnaires, screenings, attendance information, as well as academic and behavioral data. Only if permission is granted is this form to be scanned and emailed to the Ldoe using our secure email trauma recovery grant at la.gov with the subject line student name _ consent form brackets secure. Anytime you are sending confidential student information, such as this form, it is essential that you include secure in brackets. This ensures that the email will be delivered in a secure manner. All subject line directions can be found on the individual forms in red, as well as in the school guide. We know counselors have a lot on their plates and wear many hats. As a result, we have formed a counselor support team. This team is a tool to aid schools in successfully referring students for the trauma grant. All of their work will be done virtually. The counselor support team will answer questions related to the trauma grant and administer the trauma screener when a school does not have the resources to do so. Counselors will be accessible during school hours as well as after hours. In order to have a CST member administer the trauma screener, schools must make an appointment by contacting their assigned counselor. The CST is in the process of being set up. Once the CST is up and running, participating schools will be informed of their assigned counselor, and the school guide will be edited to reflect these changes. Trauma screeners. The screeners utilized by the trauma grant were made by Tulane University's Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences as part of the Louisiana Child Welfare Project. Students 7 years of age and older must be screened using the Child and Adolescent Ptsd screen. Children 6 years of age and younger must be screened using the Young Child Ptsd screen. This is to be completed by the student's parent or guardian. The Child and Adolescent Ptsd screen is to be given to students 7 years of age and older. You must determine if the student can complete the screener on his, her, or their own. You should use your best judgment when making this decision. You may read the screener aloud to a student as an interview and explain the items at the student's developmental level. If the student is too young to do the screener on their own, such as any student between the ages of 7 and 10, or is unable to complete the screener due to other reasons, such as a reading delay. For our diverse learners, please make sure to take into account their IEPs or 504 plans when making this decision. When reading the screener, be sure to use a matter-of-fact tone and exhibit a calm disposition. If you would like to see an example, you can watch the TBH Boy Session, which is a training video that Tulane created. Please read the instructions located at the top of the screener aloud to every student, making sure they understand what is considered a traumatic event and what frequency means. You must do this before the student begins the screener. After the screener is complete, tally up the scores to determine if the student should be referred for further trauma screening. These instructions, including the link to the training video, can be found in the school guide. This is a screenshot of the child and adolescent PTSD screen. Please read the top of the screener to every student, making sure they understand what is being asked of them. If you ever have any questions or concerns about the screener, you may contact a member of the counselor support team. This information will be provided in the school guide. The young child PTSD screen is to be given to the parent or guardian of students 6 years of age and younger. Please ensure the parent has read the instructions located at the top of the screener, making sure they understand what is considered a traumatic event and what frequency means. Inform the parent or guardian that they will not be scoring the screener and that they should only answer the 12 questions on page 1 and 6 questions on page 2. After the screener is complete, tally up the scores to determine if the student should be referred for further trauma screening. This is a screenshot of the young child PTSD screen. It looks very similar to the adolescent PTSD screen, but is meant for parents or guardians to complete. Again, please make sure the parent or guardian has read the top of the screener. If you have any questions or concerns about the screener, you may contact a member of the counselor support team. And like the child adolescent PTSD screen, all of this information will be included in the school guide. Let's keep looking at our school-based referral pathway. Once the trauma screener is given and possible trauma is identified, a member of the trauma response team must complete the student eligibility checklist and submit it to the Ldoe for review. The staff member who completes the checklist must sign and date the form. Forms should be submitted by the second Friday of each month. The eligibility checklist is an incredibly important step in the referral process. A member of the trauma response team must complete the eligibility checklist. This checklist should then be scanned and emailed to Trauma Recovery Grant at la.gov with the subject line school name _ eligibility brackets secure. Again, please make sure to include secure in brackets. The staff member who completes the checklist on page 1 must sign and date the form. We will go into further details about the form on the next slide. This is a screenshot of page 1 of the student eligibility checklist. A trauma response team member should walk through the eligibility checklist. This can be done with or without the student's parent or guardian. Please include the student's unique ID, as this will be how the Ldoe identifies the student. Make sure to really check the boxes so the Ldoe has a clear understanding of eligibility. If you're on the fence about a student's health insurance eligibility, please talk with that student's parent or guardian. If you are still unsure after that conversation, please contact the Ldoe to discuss the matter. This is a screenshot of page 2 of the student eligibility checklist. This is the most important page for counselors. You must confirm that 1, the trauma screening consent form is on file, 2, that the student was identified as having potential trauma, and 3, that the student met the eligibility criteria. Please make sure to write in who administered the screener, which screener was used, and the date it was administered. Again, the staff member who completed the eligibility checklist on the first page must sign and date the form. This may be you or another member of the trauma response team. Do not send the Ldoe a copy of the screener. The Ldoe only needs the eligibility checklist and parent consent form. After the Ldoe receives the student eligibility checklist, we will contact your school's trauma response team with a decision. Students who are deemed ineligible will receive school supports. For students who are deemed eligible, you will share the mental health provider list with the student's family. The packet contains information for parents as well as a list of mental health providers organized by region. Please remind parents to read instructions on the first page of the packet to see next steps. The family will then select a mental health provider of their choice and call to make an appointment for a formal trauma screener. They must state that they were referred through the trauma recovery grant. If the trauma is verified and payment eligibility checks out, the student will begin receiving services through the grant program. If the student is not eligible, then school supports will be provided. All of this information, including the mental health provider list, can be found on the Ldoe website. How do you let families know about the program? Please spread the word. Schools should send out the parent letter, distribute the staff letter to all school staff, and give interested parents the parent one-pager. What kind of data is the Ldoe collecting? There are several reporting measures that we will be collecting. We will be collecting student attendance, behavior, and academic performance data. Most additional measures will be collected at the provider point of service. We must report the child and parents' overall satisfaction with the services they've received, and we must assess change over time in student well-being. So your role in data collection. Families will be completing a trauma grant satisfaction survey available online and as a paper form. Families who choose to complete the form on paper will return the form to their child's school, who is then responsible for emailing the form to the Ldoe. The survey should be scanned and emailed to Trauma Recovery Grant at la.gov with the subject line student name _ TRDG survey (secure). These directions can be found on the form and in the school guide. So where can you find these resources? All resources can be found on the Ldoe website. After you arrive on louisianabelieves.com, please click Library. Once you arrive at Library, you should select Family Support. Once you arrive at Family Support, you should scroll down to the very bottom where you will see Trauma Recovery Demonstration Grant. Under this tab will be all necessary files. The school guide is already uploaded, and after this presentation, we will upload the deck along with the recorded webinar. The Trauma Recovery Demonstration Grant one-pager, TRDG one-pager, gives an overview of the grant program and next steps for how schools can get involved. Feel free to download the one-pager and share it with your admin.